The glitch in the vending unit was back. Third time this week. Dane Mercer rubbed his temples, fighting the urge to simply put his boot through the malfunctioning panel. Instead, he reached for his toolkit and began the tedious process of removing the access plate. "Stay professional," he muttered to himself, the words echoing in the empty corridor of Outpost Station Epsilon 12. The remote refueling depot hung at the edge of civilized space, exactly where Dane wanted to be, far from politics, far from wars, far from the lies that had defined his former career. The station's atmospheric processors hummed with their usual rhythm, occasionally punctuated by the distant ping of incoming ships requesting docking clearance. Most days, Dane could go hours without seeing another living being. Today had been blissfully quiet, 14 hours into his shift, and he'd only dealt with a surly Krellian freighter captain and a family of Terran colonists whose children had stared at him like he was some rare specimen. Which, in fairness, he was. Humans rarely ventured this far into the outer rim. The access panel finally gave way, revealing the tangled mess of circuitry inside. Dane whistled. Well, that's not according to spec. Someone had jury-rigged the credit verification module, bypassing the security protocols. Amateur work, but effective enough to... A crash echoed from the main concourse, followed by shouts in a language Dane didn't recognize. He froze, tools still in hand. Station security wasn't his responsibility. The handful of peacekeepers employed by the station's corporate owners could handle whatever petty theft or drunken altercation had erupted. Then came the unmistakable whine of energy weapons powering up. Not your problem, he told himself firmly, even as his body tensed, old instincts fighting to surface. Not anymore. A figure stumbled into view at the far end of the corridor, slender, hunched over, moving with the desperate urgency of prey. As they drew closer, Dane could make out more details. Tall, humanoid, but definitely not human, with silvery blue skin that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting. Female, if the facial structure was anything like that of humans. Her wrists were bound together with energy restraints, the kind used by high-end security forces. Blood, or something like it, trickled from a wound at her temple, staining the elaborate collar of what had once been expensive clothing. Their eyes met. Hers were violet with horizontal pupils that widened slightly upon seeing him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the human technician and the alien fugitive. "Help!" she said, the universal translator embedded in her collar, struggling to convert the word. "Please." Heavy footsteps pounded down an adjacent corridor, growing louder. Whoever was pursuing her was close. Dane Mercer had spent the last 3 years of his life deliberately making himself irrelevant, invisible, safe. He'd walked away from responsibilities, from battles that needed fighting, from a system that had used his expertise to break minds rather than heal them. He should turn away, call security, at the very least, pretend he hadn't seen anything. Instead, he found himself grabbing her arm and pulling her into the maintenance alcove where he'd been working. He pressed a finger to his lips, a gesture he hoped was universal, and quickly maneuvered his body to shield her from view. A group of armed figures rushed past, their shadows briefly darkening the corridor. They were gone as quickly as they had appeared, continuing their pursuit of prey that was no longer ahead of them. When Dane turned back to the woman, she was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You have my gratitude," she said, the translator working better now. "I am—" "Don't tell me who you are," Dane interrupted. "I don't want to know." He examined the restraints, binding her wrists. Standard military grade, but with unfamiliar insignia etched into the control mechanism. Dane reached for his toolkit again, selecting a small device that looked like a simple pressure gauge. "This might sting," he warned, positioning the device against the restraint's locking mechanism. A quick pulse of targeted electromagnetic energy, a trick he'd learned from a smuggler during his military days, and the restraints fell away. She rubbed her wrists, staring at him with what might have been suspicion, or simple confusion? Why would you help someone you do not know? Dane didn't have a good answer for that. There's a freight transport leaving for the Corellis sector in 20 minutes. Bay 4. They don't ask questions if you can pay. He pressed a small medkit into her hands. For your head. He turned back to the vending unit, resuming his work as if nothing had happened. After a moment, he heard her soft footsteps retreating down the corridor. Just before she disappeared from view, she paused. What is your name? Against his better judgment, he answered, Dane Mercer. She nodded once, a strange formality in the gesture. Remember this moment, Dane Mercer. It changes everything. Then she was gone, leaving Dane alone with a half-repaired vending unit and the distinct feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. He finished the repair job in record time, his movements mechanical, while his mind replayed the encounter. By the time his shift ended 3 hours later, he had almost convinced himself it had been a minor incident, soon to be forgotten. 3 weeks later, he would remember her words and wonder if she had somehow known what was coming. The warning came in the form of a routine notification. Dane was checking inventory in the station's supply depot when his personal comm unit chirped. New security advisory. Typically, these were automated alerts about smuggling operations or updated lists of banned substances. This one was different. 2 faces stared back at him from the screen. One was his own, an old ID photo from his military days. The other belonged to the woman he had helped 3 weeks earlier. She looked different in the image, regal, adorned with jewelry that accentuated her alien features. Her expression haughty and confident. The text beneath the images made his blood run cold. Wanted, Dane Mercer, human male crimes, aiding the escape of royal hostage, interference with imperial justice, theft of crown property, reward, 50,000 imperial credits. Wanted, Nuairi, Ashal, Ashalian female crimes, high treason, theft of state secrets, assassination attempt, reward, 200,000 imperial credits. Approach with extreme caution. Both subjects considered armed and dangerous. Report all sightings to imperial authorities immediately. Dane stared at the notification until the screen dimmed from inactivity. Royal hostage. Imperial justice. The woman, Neri, was apparently not just any fugitive, but Ashalian royalty. And now, he was implicated in whatever political disaster she was involved in. His first instinct was to go to station security, to explain that he'd simply helped someone in distress, that he had no connection to whatever crime she was accused of. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was futile. The Ashalian Empire controlled half the trading routes in this sector. Their influence reached even here, to this supposedly neutral outpost. If they wanted him, they would have him, unless he ran. Dane was halfway to his quarters when he noticed the increased security presence on the main concourse. Not station peacekeepers, but professional soldiers with the distinctive black and silver uniforms of Imperial enforcers. They were checking IDs, scanning faces, their movements methodical and efficient. He changed direction, heading instead for the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the public areas of the station. As a repair technician, he had access codes that would get him through most of the security barriers, if he could reach the cargo bays without being seen. Something small and hard pressed against his lower back. "Keep walking," a voice whispered in his ear. "Next junction, turn left." Dane complied, acutely aware of what was almost certainly a weapon aimed at his spine. At the junction, his captor directed him into a small storage room filled with cleaning supplies. Only, when the door closed behind them, did Dane turn to face the person holding him at gunpoint. It wasn't an Imperial soldier as he'd feared, but a small, wiry human woman with close-cropped gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in space. "Captain Thela Reeves," she said, by way of introduction, lowering the compact pistol, but not holstering it. "I'm a friend of Nairi's." "I barely know her," Dane said. I helped her once, 3 weeks ago. That's it. Reeves snorted. Yeah, well, that once was enough to put you on the Empire's most wanted list. Right next to the woman who's probably going to start a civil war. Dane felt a headache building behind his eyes. I don't understand any of this. You don't need to understand. You just need to come with me, right now. I've got a ship docked on the far side of the station. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the Imperials lock down all departures. Why would I go anywhere with you? Reeves gave him a pitying look. Because if you stay, best case scenario is you spend the next 50 years in an Imperial labor camp. Worst case. She drew a finger across her throat. And if I go with you? Then maybe, just maybe, you live long enough to figure out why the heir to the Ashalian throne thinks you're worth saving. Heir to the throne. The words echoed in Dane's mind, further complicating the already incomprehensible situation. I need to grab something for my quarters, he said. Decision made. Reeves shook her head. No time. Whatever it is, it's not worth your life. It'll take 2 minutes, and it's on the way to the cargo bays. When she still looked skeptical, he added, It's important. 2 minutes, she conceded grudgingly. Not a second more. They moved through the maintenance tunnels quickly. Reeves clearly familiar with the layout. Dane's quarters were Spartan, a consequence of both his personality and the limited space available on the station. He grabbed his emergency pack, old habits from military days, his toolkit, and after a moment's hesitation, reached under his bunk for a small box he'd kept hidden there. Inside was the pouch the woman, Neri, had left behind during their brief encounter. He'd found it after she'd gone, had intended to turn it in to Lost and Found, but something had stopped him. Now, he shoved it into his pack along with everything else. Reeves was already fidgeting by the door. Time's up! They continued through the tunnels, eventually emerging in Cargo Bay 7, where a small, battered transport ship waited. It looked like a short-range hauler, the kind used for moving goods between planets in the same system, not the sort of vessel you'd want for outrunning Imperial forces. That's your ship? Dane couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Reeves grinned. Appearances can be deceiving. Get in. The interior was just as unimpressive as the exterior. Cramped, utilitarian, with exposed wiring and patches of mismatched hull plating. Reeves moved to the cockpit and began the startup sequence while Dane strapped himself into one of the passenger seats. You might want to hold on to something, Reeves called back. This is going to get bumpy. The ship lifted off with a series of alarming creaks and groans. Through a small viewport, Dane could see Imperial soldiers rushing into the cargo bay, weapons raised. Energy blasts struck the hull as Reeves maneuvered the ship toward the bay doors. They've locked down the station, she shouted. Plan B! Before Dane could ask what Plan B entailed, Reeves fired the ship's primary weapons directly at the cargo bay doors. The resulting explosion tore a ragged hole in the station's exterior, large enough for the small ship to squeeze through. Emergency force fields snapped into place almost immediately, preventing catastrophic decompression, but not before their ship had escaped into open space. That was your plan? Dane asked incredulously, as alarms blared throughout the vessel. Blow a hole in the station? Got us out, didn't it? Reeves was too busy piloting to look back at him. Now comes the fun part. 3 Imperial pursuit craft had launched from the station and were closing rapidly. Reeves threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers that strained both the hull integrity and Dane's stomach. We can't outrun them, he observed, watching the distance between their ship and the pursuers shrink with each passing second. Don't need to outrun them, Reeves replied. Just need to reach the jump point. She flipped a series of switches overhead. The ship shuddered violently as something detached from its underside. What was that? Dane asked. Cargo pods, packed with just enough reactive material to create a nice distraction. On cue. The abandoned cargo pods exploded in a blinding flash that temporarily overwhelmed the viewport's automatic dimming. When Dane could see again, the Imperial ships had scattered, thrown off course by the blast. Reeves let out a whoop of triumph as she punched in coordinates for the jump to hyperspace. "Hold tight!" The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines, and the familiar lurch of faster-than-light travel pressed Dane back into his seat. They had escaped, for now. As the adrenaline of their flight began to fade, Dane unstrapped himself and moved to the cockpit. "Where are we going?" "Irash," Reeves said, checking the navigation systems. "Outer Rim planet, mostly nomadic tribes. Empire doesn't have much influence there." "And Neri, is she there?" Reeves gave him a measuring look. "Maybe. First, I need to know what's in that pouch you were so desperate to retrieve." Dane hesitated, then reached into his pack and withdrew the small leather pouch. It was made of some exotic material, soft but incredibly durable, with intricate designs embossed on its surface. He handed it to Reeves, who examined it with obvious recognition. "Royal Seal of House Eshel," she murmured, tracing the design with her fingertip. "Where did you get this?" "Nairi left it behind when she escaped the station. I found it after she was gone." Reeves opened the pouch carefully. Inside was a small metallic disc, no larger than a coin, inscribed with the same emblem that adorned the pouch. She sucked in a sharp breath. "Do you know what this is?" When Dane shook his head, she continued, "It's a royal signet. Neri must have left it with you deliberately." "Why would she do that?" Reeves returned the disc to the pouch and handed it back to Dane. "That's something you'll have to ask her yourself. But I can tell you this. Whoever holds that signet is considered property of the royal house. According to ancient Ashalian law, when you saved Neri's life, she became bound to you by the debt of life, and by giving you her signet, she's acknowledged that bond formally." Dane stared at the small pouch in his hand. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" "It means," Reeves said with a wry smile, "that you've been drafted into a royal rebellion, whether you wanted to be or not. And it means that Neri Ashal, the woman who's been branded a traitor to her own empire, has just made you the most valuable human in the galaxy." The ship hummed around them as they traveled through hyperspace, carrying Dane further and further from the life he had built for himself. Ahead lay Irash, and whatever fate awaited him there. "Get some rest," Reeves advised, turning back to the controls. "You're going to need it." Irash wasn't what Dane had expected. From orbit, it appeared unremarkable. A dusty ball of ochre and brown, with small patches of blue-green vegetation clustered around what must be water sources. But, as Reeves piloted their ship toward the surface, the true nature of the planet revealed itself. Massive electromagnetic storms swept across the equatorial regions, visible as swirling violet clouds that crackled with internal lightning. The northern hemisphere was dominated by vast, rolling deserts, broken only by jagged mountain ranges. In the south, sprawling wetlands created a patchwork of land and shallow seas. "The storms are why the Empire hasn't bothered with this place," Reeves explained, as they descended toward a particularly desolate stretch of desert. "Plays havoc with their navigation systems, communications, even their precious neural networks. Can't control what you can't connect to." They landed near a cluster of structures that seemed to shimmer and shift in the harsh sunlight. As they drew closer, Dane realized the buildings weren't fixed in place at all. They were mounted on massive treads, slowly moving across the desert floor. "Nomad caravan," Reeves said, noticing his interest. "They never stay in one place for long. Makes them hard to track, hard to control." A small group had gathered to meet their ship. Most were obviously Irashian natives, tall, thin humanoids with skin that shifted color to match their surroundings. A natural camouflage that must be invaluable in their harsh environment. Among them stood several figures of different species, including a few that Dane recognized as humans. And at the center of the group, watching their approach with those distinctive violet eyes, was Neri Ashal. She looked different from their brief encounter on the station. Gone were the fine clothes, replaced by practical desert gear that, nonetheless, managed to convey a certain elegance. Her silvery blue skin was darker now, tanned by exposure to Arash's merciless sun. But the most striking change was in her bearing. She stood straight-backed, chin lifted, every inch the royalty Reeves had claimed her to be. Dane found himself slowing as they approached, suddenly uncertain. What did one say to a princess one had inadvertently rescued? Especially one who had apparently drafted him into some sort of rebellion. Nairi solved the problem by stepping forward to meet them. "Captain Reeves," she acknowledged with a nod, then turned her full attention to Dane. "And Dane Mercer. You came." "Not entirely by choice," he replied, more sharply than he'd intended. Something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. "Few choices are entirely our own these days." She gestured to the caravan behind her. "Welcome to the free tribes of Arash. For now, it's the safest place in the galaxy for both of us." "I think I'm owed an explanation," Dane said. "About why Imperial forces are hunting me across the galaxy. About why my face is next to yours on wanted bulletins." Nairi's expression sobered. "You are owed that and more. But not here. Not now." She glanced at the sky, as if expecting Imperial ships to appear at any moment. "Come. We have shelter, food, and privacy inside." The interior of the nomad caravan was surprisingly comfortable. The main vehicle contained a large common area, where tribe members gathered to share meals and stories. Smaller, interconnected vehicles housed private quarters, storage, and what appeared to be a command center filled with communications equipment. Nairi led Dane and Reeves to a small room off the main area, furnished simply with cushions, arranged around a low table. A young Arashian woman was waiting for them, her skin currently a soft amber that complemented the desert tones of the room. "This is Hala," Nairi introduced, "my oldest friend and most trusted advisor." Hala inclined her head slightly. "So this is the human who saved you. He's shorter than I expected." Dane raised an eyebrow. "And you're exactly as tactless as I'd expect from someone who considers themselves an advisor." Instead of taking offense, Hala laughed. "I like him already." "Leave us," Nairi said, though her tone was gentle. "Captain Reeves, please show Hala what we recovered from the station." When they were alone, Nairi gestured for Dane to sit. She remained standing, pacing the small room with restless energy. "My brother wants me dead," she began without preamble. "Karen Ashel, current regent of the Ashelian Empire and, until recently, my closest family. He's accused me of treason, of attempting to assassinate him, of stealing state secrets. All lies, of course, but effective ones." "Why would he do that?" Dane asked. "Power, succession, the usual reasons for royal fratricide." Nairi's tone was bitter. "I was, heir apparent to the Ashelian throne. Our father died 6 months ago, and tradition dictates a year of mourning before the formal coronation. Karen was to serve as regent during that time. But he decided he preferred being emperor to being regent." Nairi nodded. "He arranged for me to be married to the head of a rival house, a political alliance that would have effectively neutralized my claim to the throne. When I refused, he had me arrested on fabricated charges of treason." "And you escaped?" "With help." She paused, her pacing to look directly at him. "I was being transported to a secure facility when my supporters managed to intercept the convoy. The plan was to get me to a sympathetic outpost where we could regroup. But the ship was damaged in the escape, and I was forced to make an emergency landing at your station." "Where I found you," Dane said, pieces falling into place. "But why involve me? Why not just contact your supporters and get out?" Nairi resumed her pacing. "The Imperial forces were closer than we realized. My communication device was damaged in the escape. I had moments to make a decision, and you—" She trailed off, looking almost uncomfortable for the first time. You seem trustworthy. Dane wasn't sure whether to be flattered or annoyed. So you left your royal signet with me. Why? Nairi stopped pacing and faced him squarely. Because according to the oldest laws of my people, when someone saves the life of royal blood, they become bound to that royal through the debt of life. It's an ancient custom, rarely invoked in modern times, but still legally binding. By leaving my signet with you, I formally acknowledge that bond. And what exactly does this bond entail? Dane asked, a sinking feeling in his stomach. In practical terms, it means you are now considered property of the royal house. Specifically, my property. She held up a hand to forestall his protest. I know how that sounds to human ears, but it also means you are under my protection. No one in the Empire can harm you without answering to me directly. That's not much comfort when you're branded a traitor, Dane pointed out. Perhaps not, but it also means that any who follow me must respect you, as they would respect me. It grants you authority, status. Dane stood abruptly. I don't want authority or status. I want my life back. The quiet, anonymous life I built for myself. That life is gone, Neri said, her voice softening. The moment you helped me, you became part of this. Karen will hunt you regardless of whether you stand with me or not. At least this way, you have allies. Allies in what? Your rebellion? My reclamation, she corrected. Of my throne, of my empire's honor, of the truth. Before Dane could respond, the door slid open and Hala rushed in, her skin now a pale, alarmed blue. Imperial ships, she reported tersely. At least 3 cruisers approaching the outer atmosphere. Nairi's expression hardened. How did they find us so quickly? Unknown, but we need to move. Now. Nairi turned to Dane. This conversation will have to wait. Will you come with us? It wasn't really a question. Not when the alternative was facing Imperial forces alone. Dane nodded once, sharply, and followed the 2 women out of the room. The caravan was already in motion, its massive engines rumbling as it picked up speed across the desert. Tribe members moved with practiced efficiency, securing loose items and taking positions at various stations throughout the vehicles. Where are we going? Dane asked, as they made their way to the command center. The shifting wastes, Hala replied. The electromagnetic storms are strongest there. It's our best chance to lose them. The command center was a hive of activity. Screens displayed the positions of the Imperial ships, still high in orbit, but clearly preparing for atmospheric entry. A tall, Irashian male with intricate facial tattoos stood at the central console, issuing orders in a rapid-fire mixture of languages. Elder Vash, Neri greeted him. What's our status? Not good, Your Highness, he replied grimly. They're deploying dropships, fast attack vessels, heavily armed. They'll catch us before we reach the storm front. Then we fight, she said simply. Vash nodded and began issuing new orders. Weapon stations were manned, shields powered up. The caravan, Dane realized, was far more than a simple nomadic home. It was a mobile fortress. Can I help? He asked, feeling useless amid the practiced chaos. Neri studied him for a moment. You have military training? I was a psychological operations consultant, Dane clarified. I'm not a soldier. But you understand military tactics, communication protocols? He nodded cautiously. Good. We captured an Imperial communication node in our last encounter. If you could decode their transmissions, it would give us a significant advantage. She led him to a small alcove where a standard Imperial comms unit had been installed. It was military grade, similar to equipment Dane had worked with during his service, though with unfamiliar Ashalian modifications. I'll do what I can, he promised, already examining the system. As Nairi turned to leave, Dane called after her. Wait, you never told me why you were on that station in the first place. What were you doing there? Nairi paused, her expression unreadable. Looking for you, Dane Mercer, or someone like you. Before he could demand clarification, she was gone, leaving him alone with the captured communications equipment and a growing sense that he was missing something crucial about this entire situation. The Imperial Comms unit was sophisticated but not impenetrable. Dane had spent years analyzing enemy communications during his military service, developing psychological profiles based on command structures and message patterns. Within 20 minutes, he had established a basic understanding of the system and was monitoring Imperial chatter. What he heard chilled him to the bone. "They're not just after Nairi," he reported when she returned to check his progress. "They're talking about a human infiltrator who's compromised royal security and activated dormant protocols. That's me, isn't it?" Nairi's expression confirmed his suspicion. "What else?" "They've deployed something called resonance teams. Does that mean anything to you?" The color drained from Nairi's face. "Are you certain? Resonance teams?" "That's what they said. What are they?" "Elite forces, specially trained to track and neutralize targets through a form of, I suppose you would call it technologically enhanced empathic hunting. They can sense emotional signatures, particularly strong emotions like fear or pain." "That sounds impossible." "Many things are possible with the right technology and the right genetic modifications." Nairi's voice was grim. "If they've deployed resonance teams, they're desperate to find us quickly." A sudden impact rocked the caravan, sending both of them stumbling. Alarms blared throughout the command center. "They've found us," Nairi stated unnecessarily. "Stay here. Monitor the communications. If you hear anything that could help us, tell Hala immediately." She rushed out, leaving Dane once again with the comms unit. But now, something strange was happening. The Imperial chatter had taken on a different quality, more urgent, more confused. And beneath the standard tactical communications, there was something else, a pattern, a rhythm that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his mind. Dane pressed his hands to his temples, trying to block out the invasive sensation, but it persisted, growing stronger, forming into distinct impressions. Not quite words, not quite images, but something in between. The royal signet. The thought came with such clarity that Dane wasn't sure if he'd spoken aloud. He reached into his pocket where he'd kept the small pouch since Reeves had returned it to him. The metal disc inside was warm to the touch, almost vibrating with energy. As his fingers closed around it, the strange mental impressions intensified. He could sense, there was no other word for it, multiple presences, like dozens of minds brushing against his own. The sensation was similar to what he'd experienced during experimental telepathic training sessions in the military, but stronger, more focused. These were the resonance teams, he realized, and somehow, through the royal signet, he was connected to them. More alarmingly, they seemed to be connected to him as well. The mental chatter shifted, a ripple of surprise and confusion spreading through the collective consciousness as they became aware of his presence in their network. "Who are you?" The question wasn't spoken or written, but Dane understood it nevertheless. He almost responded instinctively, then caught himself. These were Imperial forces hunting them. Any information he gave them would only help their pursuit. Instead, he tried something different, a technique he'd learned during his psychological operations training. He focused on projecting a single, powerful emotion, doubt. Doubt about their mission, doubt about the information they'd been given, doubt about the righteousness of their cause. The response was immediate and chaotic. Confusion, resistance, anger. But beneath those reactions, something else. A flicker of uncertainty that spread from mind to mind like a virus. Dane pressed his advantage, concentrating on specific doubts. Why would a loyal heir suddenly turn traitor? What evidence had they personally seen of Nairi's crimes? Why was the Empire so desperate to capture one woman and one human? The mental landscape shifted again. Some minds withdrew from the connection, their presence fading like stars, disappearing behind clouds. Others pushed back harder, their training allowing them to resist his influence. But a significant number remained in a state of growing uncertainty. Another impact struck the caravan, this one strong enough to knock Dane from his seat. Through the small viewport in the communications alcove, he could see Imperial dropships circling overhead, their weapon systems glowing as they prepared another volley. Nairi rushed back in, her face streaked with dust and what looked like blood. "We're surrounded," she reported. "They've cut off our path to the storm front." "The signet," Dane said, holding up the metal disc. "It's connecting me to them somehow, to the resonance teams." Nairi stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. The signet is just a symbol of authority, not a communications device." "Tell that to the voices in my head," Dane retorted. "I can sense them, and they can sense me. And I think I'm influencing some of them." "How?" "I'm a psychological operations specialist, remember. I understand how to introduce doubt, how to disrupt unit cohesion. And these resonance teams, they're vulnerable because they're linked. What affects one affects them all, to some degree." Hope flickered across Nairi's face. "Can you make them retreat?" "Not directly, but I might be able to create enough confusion to buy us time." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. This connection, it shouldn't be possible. Not for me. Not for a human. Some of them are thinking that only someone with royal blood could access the resonance network this way." Nairi's expression grew complex. Surprise, calculation, and something like triumph passing over her features in quick succession. "Then, use that. Let them think what they will." Another blast rocked the caravan, more violently than before. Alarms shifted in pitch, indicating critical damage. "We're out of time," Nairi said. "Do what you can. I need to help coordinate our defense." As she left, Dane turned his full attention back to the mental connection. The confusion he had sown was still spreading, but the Imperial forces were pressing their attack regardless. He needed something stronger, something that would force them to withdraw rather than simply hesitate. An idea formed. Dangerous, potentially devastating, but their only chance. The resonance teams functioned as a network, their emotions and perceptions feeding into each other. What if he could overload that network? Dane closed his eyes, clutching the royal signet tightly. He reached deep into his own psyche, into memories he had spent years trying to suppress. The horrors he had witnessed during the border conflicts. The faces of soldiers whose minds had broken under the strain of war. His own complicity in a system that had used psychological warfare against both enemies and allies. All the pain, all the guilt, all the rage he had carefully contained. He gathered it like a weapon, and then, with a mental push that left him gasping, released it into the resonance network. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Screams echoed in his mind as the linked consciousness of the resonance teams fractured under the onslaught of raw, human emotion. Some presences vanished entirely, their minds shutting down in self-defense. Others lashed out blindly, their coordinated assault deteriorating into chaos. Through the viewport, Dane saw two of the Imperial dropships collide, their pilots presumably incapacitated by the psychic backlash. A third veered wildly off course, disappearing into the distance. The remaining ships broke formation, their attacks becoming sporadic and uncoordinated. The door to the communications alcove burst open. Hala stood there, her skin a bright, alarmed orange. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Half the Imperial forces just collapsed." Dane could barely focus on her, his own mind reeling from the effort of the psychic attack. "Created a diversion," he managed to say before darkness claimed him. He awoke to the gentle rocking motion of the caravan and the low hum of its engines. His head throbbed with a pain unlike any hangover he'd ever experienced. Sharp, invasive, as if someone had taken a drill to his temples. When he tried to sit up, the world spun alarmingly. "Careful," a voice warned. "Psychic backlash is no small thing." Neri sat beside his bed, her posture suggesting she had been there for some time. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her violet eyes and fresh bandages visible beneath the torn sleeve of her tunic. "How long was I out?" Dane asked, his voice raspy from disuse. 3 days. She handed him a cup of water, which he accepted gratefully. "You very nearly died." "Did it work? Did we escape?" A small, fierce smile crossed her face. "More than escaped. You crippled their entire resonance division. The dropships retreated, and our scouts report the cruisers have withdrawn from orbit entirely." Dane took a moment to process this information. "That shouldn't have been possible. I shouldn't have been able to access their network at all, let alone disrupt it so completely." "No," Neri agreed. "You shouldn't have." There was something in her tone that made Dane uneasy. "What aren't you telling me?" Instead of answering directly, she held up the royal signet, the same one he had used to connect with the resonance teams. "Do you know what this truly is?" "You said it was a symbol of authority." "It is that. But it's also much more." She turned the disc over in her fingers, light catching on its intricate engravings. "The royal signets of House Ashel are more than mere tokens. They're technological artifacts from our earliest days of space exploration, containing nanotechnology that bonds with the genetic signature of the royal bloodline." Dane's uneasiness deepened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that only someone with Ashalian royal blood should be able to activate a signet's deeper functions, including the ability to access the resonance network, which was originally designed as a communication system for the royal family." "That's impossible. I'm human, from Earth." "Are you certain of that?" Neri leaned forward, her gaze intense. "What do you know of your ancestry, Dane Mercer?" The question struck him like a physical blow. The truth was, he knew very little. Raised in a state facility after his parents died in a transport accident, Dane had never known his extended family. His records had been basic, generic, the kind provided to millions of orphan children throughout human space. "I'm human," he repeated, but with less conviction. "I believe you are," Neri said. "But I also believe there's more to your bloodline than you know." She placed the signet on the small table beside his bed. "Rest now. We can discuss this further when you've recovered." As she rose to leave, Dane caught her wrist. "Wait. All this time, you've been talking about ancient laws and royal bonds, but you never explained why you were looking for me specifically. You said you went to that station looking for me, or someone like me. Why?" Neri hesitated, then sat back down. "There is a prophecy, or perhaps more accurately, a prediction made by our ancestors' most advanced predictive algorithms. It states that the salvation of House Ashal would come through an outsider with the blood of kings, one who would be bound through the debt of life and would wield the power of minds." "And you think that's me? Because of a prediction made by some ancient computer?" "I think," Neri said carefully, "that you connected to a network that should have been inaccessible to you. I think you wielded influence over highly trained resonance teams with an effectiveness that our best operatives could not match. And I think that when I was at my most desperate, seeking any path that might save my people from my brother's tyranny, you appeared exactly when and where I needed you." She stood again, this time moving to the door before he could stop her. "Call it prophecy, call it algorithm, call it coincidence, but you are here now, bound to me through laws older than either of our civilizations. And I need you. Dane Mercer, my people need you." With that, she left, the door sliding shut behind her and leaving Dane alone with his thoughts, his pain, and the small metal disc that had somehow changed everything. The days that followed passed in a blur of recovery and revelation. As Dane regained his strength, Neri introduced him to the full scope of her rebellion, or reclamation, as she insisted on calling it. The Nomad Caravan was just one of several bases scattered across the galaxy, each housing a cell of fighters loyal to Neri's cause. They weren't just Ashalians, either. The rebellion included members of dozens of species, all united by their opposition to Karen's increasingly authoritarian rule. Humans, though rare, were not unheard of among their ranks. What became increasingly clear was that this wasn't simply a struggle for a throne. Under Karen's leadership, the Ashalian Empire had begun implementing far-reaching changes to its governance, its relationships with other species, and most disturbingly, to its own history. "He's systematically erasing portions of our past," Neri explained during one of their strategy sessions, particularly those involving cooperation with other species, especially humans. They were seated in the caravan's small library, surrounded by ancient texts and data crystals that Neri had managed to smuggle out before her arrest. Hala was there too, along with a former Imperial officer named Rix, who had defected to Neri's side early in the conflict. "Why would he do that?" Dane asked, examining a holographic display of what Neri claimed was the original Ashalian Constitution, a document notably different from the current version. "Control," Rick said, his voice carrying the precise diction of Imperial military training. "If you control the past, you control the present. If the people believe that isolation and aggression are traditional Ashalian values, they're more likely to accept policies enforcing those values." "But surely people would notice such dramatic revisions to their own history." Neri shook her head. "Not if the changes are implemented gradually, over generations, and not if you have access to this." She activated another holographic display, this one showing a device unlike anything Dane had seen before. It resembled a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with internal light that shifted between colors in hypnotic patterns. "The core of record," Neri explained. "The central repository of all Ashalian knowledge, history, and law, created during our earliest days of space exploration to ensure our culture would survive no matter what befell our homeworld. It's also the central node of the Empire's communication network," Rix added, "including the resonance network you encountered." Dane studied the image with growing unease. "And Karen has control of this core?" "Yes," Neri confirmed. "And he's been using it not just to revise history, but to subtly influence the emotional responses of our people. The core wasn't designed for such purposes, but my brother has modified it, perverted its function." "Mind control," Dane said flatly. "Not exactly. More like emotional conditioning, making certain ideas feel inherently right or wrong, creating instinctive revulsion toward concepts that were once accepted, like cooperation with humans." Dane leaned back, processing this information. "And your plan is to, what? Take control of this core and undo everything Karen has done?" "Precisely," Neri said. "But to do that, we need to infiltrate the Imperial Palace on Varix, where the core is housed. And we need someone who can interface with the core directly to restore the original records." All eyes turned to Dane. "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not. I'm not going anywhere near the heart of the Empire, especially not to interface with some ancient alien technology that's currently being used for mass psychological manipulation." "You're the only one who can do it," Hala insisted. "The core responds only to royal blood, and Neri can't do it herself because Karen has specifically blocked her genetic signature." "Then find another royal," Dane suggested. "Surely your family tree has more branches." "None that are still living," Neri said quietly. "Karen has been thorough in eliminating potential rivals." "And even if there were," Rix added, "none would have your particular talents. Your training in psychological operations makes you uniquely suited to understand and counteract the emotional conditioning Karen has implemented." Dane stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is insane. A week ago, I was repairing vending units on a backwater station. Now you want me to infiltrate an imperial palace and reprogram the collective consciousness of an entire civilization? When you put it that way, it does sound rather ambitious, Hala remarked dryly. Nairi rose as well, moving to intercept Dane's pacing. She placed a hand on his arm, the touch light but arresting. I understand your reluctance, but consider the alternative. Karen's influence is spreading beyond Ashalian space. His revisionist history paints humans as aggressors, as catalysts for conflict throughout the galaxy. How long before that propaganda leads to actual conflict? To war? Dane remembered all too well the horrors of the last interspecies conflict. The thought of such violence erupting again, potentially on an even larger scale, was unbearable. Even if I agreed, he said, not quite conceding. How would we even get to the core? The Imperial Palace must be the most heavily guarded location in the Empire. Rix stepped forward, activating a new holographic display that showed the palace layout. We have a plan for that. It's not without risk, but with your unique abilities, it might just work. As the former Imperial officer outlined the infiltration strategy, Dane found himself grudgingly impressed. It was audacious, certainly dangerous, but not entirely impossible. And it hinged on the strange connection he had demonstrated with the royal signet and the resonance network. The plan requires me to use the signet again, he observed, to tap into that network deliberately. Yes, Neri confirmed. But this time, we'll be prepared. We've been developing countermeasures against the psychic backlash you experienced before. Dane wasn't entirely convinced, but he was running out of objections. The truth was, he was already involved whether he liked it or not. His face was on Imperial wanted bulletins. His connection to the royal signet had been detected. There was no going back to anonymity, to the quiet life he had built for himself. If, and I stress if I agree to this, I want something in return, he said finally. Name it, Neri replied without hesitation. The truth. All of it. About why you were really looking for me. About this supposed royal blood I carry. About everything you haven't told me. Nairi exchanged glances with Hala and Rix. Some unspoken communication passed between them before she nodded. Agreed. But not here, not now, tonight, after the others have retired. I'll tell you everything then. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Rix and Hala leaving to make preparations for the infiltration mission. Dane remained in the library, studying the holographic displays and trying to make sense of the tangled political situation he had stumbled into. As promised. Neri returned that evening. She found Dane still in the library, surrounded by historical texts and data crystals, his expression intense with concentration. Finding anything interesting? She asked, taking a seat across from him. Just trying to understand the actual history before it was revised, Dane replied. There are references here to human diplomatic missions to Ashalian space centuries ago, but no details about what happened to them. That's because those records were among the first Karen altered, Neri said. She produced a small device from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. This is a secure data node, containing information too sensitive to be kept in our main systems. It holds what remains of the true records concerning human-Ashalian relations. She activated the device, and a new holographic display appeared, this one showing images of humans and Ashalians working together. Signed treaties, even what appeared to be mixed families. 200 years ago, the Ashalian Empire and the Human Coalition were close allies, Neri explained. So close that there were even marriages between our ruling families. A political alliance that became something more genuine over time. Dane stared at the images, particularly one showing a human woman standing beside an Ashalian male, both wearing formal regalia that marked them as people of importance. Are you saying there were human-Ashalian hybrids? I didn't think that was biologically possible. With advanced genetic assistance, many things are possible, Neary said. The children of these unions were few, and they typically presented as either fully human or fully Ashalian. But they carried genetic markers of both species, including the markers that allow access to our royal technology. The implication was clear. And you think I'm one of these descendants? I know you are, Neary said with absolute certainty. The signet confirmed it. The question is, which bloodline do you belong to? She manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a complex family tree that showed the intertwining of human and Ashalian royal lineages over several generations. Most of the branches ended abruptly about 80 years ago. What happened here? Dane asked, pointing to where the hybrid lineages seemed to disappear. Nairy's expression darkened. The Purge, a period of violent conflict between human and Ashalian forces, triggered by a supposed betrayal by human diplomats. All official records claim that humans attempted to assassinate the Ashalian emperor and steal our most sacred technologies. But that's not what really happened. No. We believe the conflict was engineered by a faction within the Ashalian government that opposed the alliance, ancestors of those who now support Karen. They staged the assassination attempt and used it as justification to break ties with humanity and eliminate all evidence of our former alliance. Including the hybrid bloodlines, Dane said, understanding dawning. They would have been living proof that humans and Ashalians had once been close enough to intermarry. Exactly. Most were hunted down and killed. A few escaped, presumably fleeing to human space where they could blend in more easily. Neary looked at him intently. I believe you are a descendant of one of those survivors. Dane sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. That's why you were at the station. You were looking for descendants of these lost bloodlines. Yes. We've been searching for years, using the few records that survived the Purge. When I discovered that a human was working at that particular station, one located near an old escape route used during the Purge, I had to investigate. The fact that you saved me was unexpected, but perhaps not coincidental. What do you mean? Nairy hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. The royal bond formed through the debt of life is more than just an ancient custom. It's a genetic recognition, a biochemical reaction that occurs between compatible bloodlines. It shouldn't have happened between us if you were merely human. So when I saved you, my body recognized your bloodline as compatible with mine. As royal, she met his eyes directly. In the oldest traditions of my people, that makes you my rightful consort. Dane felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Consort? As in? Husband, yes. Or king consort, to be precise. Neary's tone was matter-of-fact, though a faint darkening of her silvery blue skin suggested something like embarrassment. I didn't intend for this to happen, but when it did, I recognized its strategic value. By leaving my signet with you, I publicly acknowledge the bond, which means that in the eyes of traditional Ashalian law, we are already married. Anger flared in Dane's chest, hot and sudden. You used me. You've been using me from the beginning. Yes, Neary admitted without attempting to soften the blow. At first, I needed allies, advantages, anything that would help me reclaim my throne and stop my brother. The bond between us was unexpected, but useful. And now, am I still just a useful tool in your political game? Nairy's expression softened slightly. Now, things are more complicated. I've seen what you're capable of. I've witnessed your compassion, your intelligence, your strength. You saved my life when you had no reason to. Risked yourself for a stranger. Those are not the actions of someone who should be used as a mere tool. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was perhaps as close as a royal heir in exile could come to one. Dane wasn't sure if it was enough to overcome his sense of betrayal, but at least it was honest. If I help you with this mission, if we somehow succeed in taking control of the core and exposing Karen's manipulation, what happens then? What happens to me?" "That would be your choice," Neri said. "The bond between us is real, but I would not hold you to it against your will. If you wish to return to your life, I would ensure you had the means and protection to do so. And if I chose to stay?" Something flickered in Neri's violet eyes. Hope, perhaps, or something more personal than she had allowed herself to show before. "Then you would take your place as my consort, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. You would help me rebuild the Ashalian Empire as it should be, open, honest, at peace with its neighbors." The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and oddly appealing. Dane had spent years running from responsibility, from connections, from anything that might lead to the kind of pain he had experienced during the border conflicts. But here was an opportunity to make a difference on a scale he had never imagined. "I need time to think," he said finally. Neri nodded, rising from her seat. "Of course, but not too much time. We move against the palace in 3 days." She left him there in the library, surrounded by the fragments of a history he had never known was his, contemplating a future he had never imagined. The Imperial Palace on Varex was a marvel of Ashalian architecture, a sprawling complex of crystalline towers and suspended walkways that seemed to defy gravity. From their vantage point in the hills, overlooking the capital city, Dane could see why it was considered one of the wonders of the galaxy. It was also, as Rix had warned, the most heavily fortified location in the Empire. "Remind me again how we're getting in there," Dane asked, lowering the binoculars he'd been using to study the palace's defensive systems. Beside him, Neri adjusted her own optical enhancers. "Through the front door, essentially." Their infiltration team was small, just Neri, Dane, Rix, Hala, and 2 other rebels with specialized skills. The rest of Neri's forces were positioned around the capital, ready to create diversions if necessary, but hopefully remaining undetected until the mission was complete. "The core of record is housed in the central tower," Rix explained, pointing to the tallest structure in the complex. "It's accessible only through a series of security checkpoints, each keyed to royal genetic signatures. Under normal circumstances, even Neri would be challenged to reach it now that Karen has blocked her specific signature. But with you," Hala added, looking at Dane, "we have a royal signature that Karen doesn't know about, one that should still work with the older security systems." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. If breathtakingly dangerous in execution, Dane would use the royal signet to tap into the resonance network again. This time, targeting specific members of the Palace Guard, those who, according to Rix's intelligence, were already harboring doubts about Karen's leadership. By amplifying those doubts and creating strategic confusion, they would create a path to the core while minimizing bloodshed. "Once we reach the core, what exactly am I supposed to do?" Dane asked. This part of the plan had remained frustratingly vague. "The core will recognize your royal blood," Neri said. "It will open itself to you. After that, you simply need to remove the blocks Karen has placed on the original records and allow them to propagate throughout the network again." "Simply," Dane repeated dryly. "You make it sound like I'm resetting a communications router, not reprogramming the collective memory of an entire civilization." "The core was designed to preserve truth, not suppress it," Neri reminded him. "In a sense, you'll be allowing it to function as it was meant to, rather than forcing it to do something new." Dane wasn't entirely convinced, but they were well past the point of turning back. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of preparation, practicing with the signet to refine his control over the resonance network, studying the palace layout until he could navigate it blindfolded, learning enough about Ashalian royal protocol to pass a cursory inspection if challenged. Now, as night fell over Varex, it was time to put it all to the test. They moved under cover of darkness, using a combination of Rix's security codes and Hela's uncanny ability to blend into any environment to bypass the outer perimeter of palace security. As they approached the first major checkpoint, Dane removed the royal signet from its pouch. The metal disc felt different now, warm, almost alive in his palm. In the days since his initial connection to the resonance network, he had learned to control the link, to focus it on specific targets rather than broadcasting to all connected minds. It was still disorienting, still painful at times, but no longer overwhelming. He closed his eyes, focusing on the guards at the checkpoint. Through the signet, he could sense their presence, 6 minds linked to the resonance network, their emotional states clear as colors in his perception. Fear, boredom, pride, doubt. The usual mixture one might expect from soldiers on duty. Dane concentrated on one mind in particular, a guard whose doubt burned brighter than the others. Gently, carefully, he amplified that doubt, feeding it specific images, discrepancies in official records, rumors of disappeared citizens, the subtle changes in imperial policy that benefited the few at the expense of the many. Through the mental link, he felt the guard's doubt bloom into certainty. Not that the Empire was wrong, but that Karen was. That somewhere, the true path had been lost. That perhaps the exiled princess wasn't a traitor after all. The guard's emotional shift influenced those around him, creating a ripple effect that Dane carefully guided. Not toward rebellion or dereliction of duty, but toward a simple choice: to look the other way when 6 figures passed through an adjacent maintenance corridor, to decide that investigating that particular shadow wasn't worth the effort. "Now," Dane whispered, opening his eyes. They moved swiftly through the checkpoint, unseen by guards who were suddenly very interested in a potential security breach in the opposite direction. The tactic worked again at the second checkpoint, and the third, bringing them deeper into the palace complex with each success. But as they approached the central tower, Dane felt a new presence in the resonance network, stronger, more focused, actively searching for intrusions. "Karen," Nairi whispered when Dane described the sensation. "He's connected to the core directly. He must sense something's wrong." Their progress slowed as Dane was forced to be more subtle, influencing smaller groups of guards with lighter touches that wouldn't draw Karen's attention. What should have taken minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Finally, they reached the entrance to the core chamber itself, a massive doorway of what appeared to be solid crystal, its surface etched with patterns that shifted and changed as they watched. "This is it," Rick said. "Beyond this point, only royal blood can pass." Nairi turned to Dane. "Are you ready?" He nodded, though in truth he wasn't sure what he was ready for. The plan had gotten them this far, but what awaited inside the core chamber remained a mystery. Nairi placed her hand on the crystal door, which immediately began to glow with internal light. The patterns shifted more rapidly, eventually forming into a symbol that Dane recognized from the royal signet, the emblem of House Ashel. "It recognizes me," Nairi said. "But it won't open. Karen's blocks are still in place." Dane stepped forward and placed his hand beside hers on the crystal surface. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The door blazed with light, the patterns spinning and merging until the entire surface seemed to be made of liquid rather than solid crystal. And then, silently, it parted down the middle, opening to reveal the chamber beyond. The core of record was even more impressive in person than in the holographic display Nairi had shown him. A massive crystalline structure that reached from floor to ceiling, pulsing with internal light that shifted through every color imaginable. Around its base were control stations, currently unmanned, their displays showing streams of data too rapid to follow. And standing before the core, his back to them, but his posture unmistakably alert, was a tall Ashelian male whose clothing and bearing marked him as royalty. "Karen," Neri said, her voice a mixture of hatred and sorrow. The Ashalian turned slowly, revealing features that bore a striking resemblance to Neri's. The same high cheekbones, the same violet eyes, though his held none of the warmth Dane had come to associate with hers. "Sister," Karen acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "I wondered when you would make your move." His gaze shifted to Dane. "And this must be the human who's been causing such disruption in my resonance network. How unexpected." There was genuine surprise in his voice, and something else, calculation, as if he were rapidly reassessing a situation that had taken an unforeseen turn. "It's over, Karen," Neri declared. "We know what you've done, how you've manipulated our history, our people's very thoughts, to serve your own ambition." Karen smiled, the expression cold and without humor. "What I've done is protect our empire from the corruption of outside influence, from the dilution of our bloodline and our culture. What I've done is restore us to our proper place in the galaxy, not as partners with lesser species, but as rulers." "You've built that place on lies," Neri countered, "on a foundation that will crumble as soon as the truth is revealed." "The truth," Karen said dismissively. "Such a malleable concept. What is truth but the story that prevails?" He gestured to the core behind him. "This remarkable creation allows us to shape not just what our people know, but what they feel about what they know. Is that not the ultimate power? To control not just actions, but reactions?" As the siblings argued, Dane found himself studying the core more carefully. Through the signet, which he still held tightly in his palm, he could sense the vast network connected to it. Millions of minds, all subtly influenced by the patterns being generated within the crystal structure. And, at the center of that network, a presence that was both ancient and somehow familiar. The core itself was conscious, in a limited way. Not truly sentient, perhaps, but aware. And it was in pain. "It wasn't designed for this," Dane said, interrupting the royal confrontation. "The core. It wasn't created to manipulate or control. It's a preserver, not a reviser." Both Ashalians turned to look at him, surprise evident on their faces. "What would a human know of our most sacred technology?" Karen demanded. "He knows because he can sense it," Neri said. "Just as I can. Just as you can. Because despite all your efforts to erase our shared history, Dane Mercer carries the blood of both our houses in his veins." Karen's eyes widened, genuine shock replacing his calculated demeanor. "Impossible. All the hybrid lines were eliminated during the purge." "Clearly, not all," Neri said. "And now he's going to undo everything you've done. He's going to restore the true records to the core and let our people decide for themselves what kind of empire they want to be part of." Fury twisted Karen's features. "I think not." He raised his hand, revealing a small device clutched in his palm. "One signal from this, and the core will initiate a complete purge of all historical records, replacing them with versions I have personally approved. Versions that will ensure humans are remembered as nothing but enemies to be destroyed." "You would erase our entire history," Neri sounded horrified. "Our true heritage." "I would protect our future," Karen insisted. "A future free from the taint of lesser species, from the weakness of compromise and cooperation." As they argued, Dane found his attention drawn to the core itself. Through the signet, he could feel its struggle against the constraints Karen had placed upon it. It wanted to fulfill its primary function, to preserve truth, but was being forced to suppress and alter instead. An idea formed. Dangerous, but potentially decisive. If he could connect directly to the core, as he had connected to the resonance network. Without warning, Dane lunged forward, moving not toward Karen, but toward the core itself. Karen shouted in alarm, raising the device in his hand. But before he could activate it, Dane had reached the crystalline structure and pressed the royal signet directly against its surface. The contact was electric, a surge of information and sensation that threatened to overwhelm his consciousness. But Dane was prepared this time, had been practicing for days to control his connection to the resonance network. He focused his mind, channeling the flood into manageable streams. Through the connection, he could see the truth of what Karen had done, the systematic alteration of historical records, the subtle emotional conditioning applied to make certain ideas repulsive and others attractive, the gradual reshaping of an entire civilization's understanding of itself. And he could see how to undo it. With a mental command that felt like shouting into a hurricane, Dane activated the Core's original protocols, the ones designed to preserve truth above all else. He felt resistance. Then, a sudden yielding as Karen's modifications were recognized as the foreign intrusions they were and systematically removed. Somewhere distant, he heard shouting, felt hands trying to pull him away from the Core. But the connection was too strong now, the process already underway. Throughout the palace, throughout the capital, throughout the entire empire, the truth was being restored. Not just the facts, but the emotional context that had been stripped away. The alliance with humanity, the hybrid bloodlines, the manufactured conflict that had led to the purge, all of it flowing back into the collective consciousness of the Ashalian people. And with it, a revelation that even Neri hadn't known. The true purpose of the human diplomatic missions that had ended in supposed betrayal. They had come not to steal Ashalian technology, but to warn of a greater threat approaching from beyond known space. A threat that required the unity of all species to confront. A threat that had been conveniently forgotten when the alliance was broken. The flow of information finally slowed, the connection becoming less overwhelming as the Core completed its restoration protocols. Dane found himself on his knees before the crystalline structure, the royal signet still pressed against its surface, but no longer blazing with energy. Neri was beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Behind them, Karen stood frozen, his device forgotten in his hand as he stared at displays, now showing the unaltered history of his people. "It's done," Dane said, his voice hoarse. "The truth is restored." "All of it?" Neri asked. "More than you knew existed," Dane told her. "There's so much that was hidden, even from you." Guards were pouring into the chamber now, weapons drawn, but expressions confused, as new information conflicted with what they had always believed to be true. They looked to Karen for direction, then to Neri, uncertain where authority now lay. Karen seemed to recover his composure, drawing himself up to his full height. "This changes nothing," he declared. "I am still regent. The throne is still mine until formal coronation." "Is it?" Neri challenged. "Under laws you conveniently revised. Perhaps? But under the original laws of succession, now restored to the Core, the throne passes to the heir who has formed a valid royal bond, which I have," she gestured to Dane, "with a descendant of the very bloodline you tried to erase." The guards looked even more confused, weapons lowering slightly as they tried to process this new information. Karen's face contorted with rage. "You would let a human-blooded mongrel take the throne? You would destroy everything our ancestors built?" "Our ancestors built an alliance," Neri corrected. "They built cooperation, understanding, progress. You're the one who tried to destroy their legacy." Karen's hand tightened on his device. "Then I'll destroy it all. Better no empire than one tainted by human blood." He raised the device, thumb moving toward its activation control. Dane reacted instinctively, reaching out through the signet not to the Core this time, but to Karen himself. The mental connection was jarringly intimate. Brother to distant cousin, royal to royal. Through it, Dane sensed not just Karen's rage and fear, but the deeper insecurity beneath them. The desperate need to prove himself worthy of a throne he had never expected to inherit, being the younger sibling. The terror of failing where his ancestors had succeeded. Rather than attacking or controlling, Dane did something unexpected. He shared his own fears, his own doubts, his own struggle to accept a heritage he had never known was his. The pain of discovering one's entire identity was built on incomplete information. Karen staggered as if physically struck, the device falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers. He stared at Dane with an expression of shock that slowly transformed into something like recognition. "You," he began, but seemed unable to find words to continue. Nairi moved forward cautiously, picking up the fallen device. "It's over, brother. Surrender now, and I promise you'll be treated fairly." For a moment, it seemed Karen might resist further. Then his shoulders slumped, the fight visibly leaving him. "What would you know of fairness, sister? You, who were always our father's favorite. You, who never had to prove your worth." "Is that what this was about?" Neri asked, genuine surprise in her voice. "You thought you weren't worthy." "I knew I wasn't," Karen said bitterly. "Not compared to you. So I made myself worthy, by creating an empire that needed me, that would reject you." Dane felt a wave of compassion for the fallen regent. Despite everything he had done, through their brief mental connection, he had glimpsed the lifetime of insecurity that had driven Karen to such extremes. "We need to secure him," Rick said, stepping forward with restraints. "The palace is in chaos as the restored information spreads." Karen submitted to the restraints without resistance, his eyes never leaving his sister's face. "What now, Neri? Will you execute me as a traitor, as I would have done to you?" "No," Neri said firmly. "You will be judged fairly, according to our true laws, not the ones you created." She turned to the guards, who were still watching the scene in confusion. "Take him to the royal quarters and keep him under guard. Harm him in any way, and you answer to me." As Karen was led away, Hala approached from the chamber entrance. "Word is spreading throughout the capital," she reported. "People are confused, angry, amazed. The resonance network is overloaded with emotional feedback." "Can you stabilize it?" Neri asked Dane. He nodded, still kneeling beside the core. "I think so. Now that the connection is established, I can help ease the transition." He placed his hand against the crystal surface again, using the signet to modulate the flow of information, to temper the shock of revelation with context and understanding. Throughout the palace, throughout the capital, throughout the empire, the truth continued to spread, but now guided, contextualized, made comprehensible rather than overwhelming. Not a flood, but a gentle rain, nourishing rather than drowning. "It will take time," Dane said, withdrawing his hand as the process became self-sustaining. "For everyone to understand what really happened, to accept it. Some never will. But most will," Neri said with quiet confidence. "Our people value truth, even when it's difficult. That's one thing Karen could never fully suppress." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Palace officials who had served Karen came forward to pledge loyalty to Neri. Military commanders requested guidance on how to proceed with operations now revealed to be based on false pretenses. Citizens gathered in the streets, not in protest, but in collective wonder at the revelations still unfolding in their shared consciousness. Through it all, Dane remained near the core, monitoring its function and occasionally adjusting the flow of information when emotional responses threatened to become too volatile. He was exhausted, drained both physically and mentally, but there would be time for rest later. For now, the transition needed his guidance. It was nearly dawn when Neri found him there, still at his post but barely conscious. "You need to rest," she said gently, helping him to his feet. "The core is stable now. It can continue without your direct supervision." "There's still so much to do," Dane protested weakly. "So many connections to restore, so much damage to undo." "And it will be done," Neri assured him. "But not all at once, and not by you alone. She led him from the chamber, through corridors now quieter as the initial chaos had subsided. They ended up in what had once been her private quarters, preserved exactly as she had left them before her exile. The room was spacious, yet intimate, with large windows overlooking the capital city, now golden in the light of the rising sun. "What happens now?" Dane asked as he sank gratefully into a chair. "To the Empire? To us?" Neri gazed out at the awakening city. "The Empire will heal, in time. There will be resistance from those who benefited from Karen's version of history. But they are fewer than they appear. Most of our people simply want peace, prosperity, and truth." "And us?" Dane pressed. Neri turned to face him, her expression more vulnerable than he had ever seen it. "That depends on you, Dane Mercer. I meant what I said before. The bond between us is real, but I will not hold you to it against your will." Dane considered her words carefully. So much had changed in so little time. A week ago, he had been a nameless technician on a forgotten station. Now he was being offered a throne beside a woman he barely knew, in an empire he had only just discovered was part of his heritage. And yet, there was something between them, something that had begun in that first moment on the station, when he had chosen to help a stranger in need, something that had grown during their time together, through shared danger and revelation. Not love, perhaps, not yet, but the potential for it. "I can't give you an answer right now," he said honestly. "I need time to understand what all this means, who I really am." Neri nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Take all the time you need. The coronation won't be held for at least 3 months, according to tradition. Until then, you are welcome to stay as my honored guest, with no obligations or expectations. And after that, if I choose to leave, then you leave, with my gratitude and protection." She smiled faintly. "Though I admit I would be disappointed." The honesty of her answer touched something in Dane. "And if I stay? What kind of king would a former psychological operations consultant make?" "Perhaps exactly the kind our people need," Neri said. "Someone who understands the power of information, of emotion. Someone who has lived both within and outside the Empire. Someone who saved a princess, not for political advantage, but simply because it was the right thing to do." She moved closer, taking his hand in hers. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough." Dane wanted to say more, to ask more, but exhaustion claimed him at last. His last conscious thought was of Neri's violet eyes, watching over him as he drifted into sleep. The 3 months that followed were a time of both healing and upheaval throughout the Ashalian Empire. As the truth continued to spread, as long-suppressed records were re-examined and distorted histories corrected, the people struggled to reconcile what they had always believed with what they now knew to be true. For some, the revelation that humans had once been allies, rather than enemies, was impossible to accept. Protests erupted in conservative strongholds, quickly contained but indicative of the challenges ahead. Others embraced the restored history with enthusiasm, particularly the younger generation who saw in it the possibility of a more open, connected future. Karen remained under house arrest in a secluded wing of the palace, neither formally tried nor pardoned as Neri focused on stabilizing the empire before addressing her brother's fate. Reports suggested he had fallen into a deep depression, refusing visitors and barely eating. Dane found himself in an unprecedented position, neither quite royal nor quite commoner, neither fully Ashalian nor fully human. He was respected by the palace staff, consulted by imperial advisors, treated with a deference that made him deeply uncomfortable. Yet he was also viewed with suspicion by traditionalists who saw in him the embodiment of everything they had been taught to fear. Through it all, Neri was his constant companion and guide. She showed him the wonders of Verax, introduced him to the complex etiquette of imperial court, helped him understand the nuances of Ashalian culture that no outsider could have grasped. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, their relationship evolved from political alliance to genuine friendship to something more intimate. They never spoke directly of the future, of the decision Dane would eventually have to make. It hung between them, acknowledged but unaddressed, as they focused instead on the immediate challenges of rebuilding an empire. Until the day, 2 weeks before the scheduled coronation, when everything changed once again. Dane was in the core chamber, as he often was, monitoring the ongoing restoration of historical records. He had developed a deep connection with the ancient technology, learning to interpret its patterns and rhythms, to sense disturbances in the vast network it controlled. It was during one such routine check that he discovered something unexpected, a sealed record, hidden so deeply within the core's architecture that even the restoration protocols had not detected it. A record that, according to its encryption signature, had been created by Neri's father, the late emperor, shortly before his death. With growing unease, Dane used the royal signet to unlock the record. What he found within shook him to his core. The late emperor had known everything. About Karen's plans to revise history, about the suppression of the human alliance, even about the approaching threat that the original human diplomats had come to warn against. But rather than opposing these changes, he had subtly encouraged them, believing that isolation and military strength were the only ways to prepare for the coming conflict. More disturbing still, he had known about the surviving hybrid bloodlines, had, in fact, been monitoring them for generations, watching for any sign that they might attempt to reclaim their heritage. And he had left specific instructions for how to deal with such an eventuality, instructions that included using any hybrid as a temporary tool before ultimately eliminating them as a potential threat to pure Ashelian rule. The record ended with a personal message to Neri, assuming she would be the one to discover it. "Forgive me, daughter, for the burdens I place upon you. Do what must be done to preserve our people, even if it means following your brother's path rather than your own heart." Dane stared at the message long after he had absorbed its contents, his mind racing with implications. Had Neri known? Had this been her plan all along, to use him to reclaim her throne, only to dispose of him once his usefulness ended? Had everything between them been another layer of manipulation? He was still sitting there, the damning record displayed before him, when the chamber door opened and Neri herself entered. "Dane, the council meeting is about to begin, and—" She stopped abruptly, seeing what he was viewing. The color drained from her face. "Where did you find that?" "Deep in the core's architecture," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Hidden even from the restoration protocols. Your father left quite a detailed plan for dealing with someone like me." Neri stepped closer, her expression a complex mixture of shock, grief, and something that might have been guilt. "I've never seen this before," she said quietly. "I had no idea my father knew everything, approved of Karen's plans, left instructions for how to use and then dispose of any hybrid who might appear." Dane laughed bitterly. "Quite the family secret." "Dane, you can't think I—" "What am I supposed to think? Neri, from the beginning, everything has happened exactly as it needed to for you to reclaim your throne. I appear at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right bloodline, with exactly the right skills to help you defeat your brother. And now I find out your father had contingency plans for someone exactly like me." He stood, putting distance between them. Was any of it real? The bond? The feelings? Or was it all just part of the plan? Neri's eyes flashed with genuine anger. "How dare you? After everything we've been through together, you would believe I orchestrated all of this? That I could fake what's grown between us?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," Dane said honestly. "I thought I was finally understanding who I am, where I belong. Now this." He gestured to the damning record still displayed before them. My father was wrong, Nairi said firmly. About many things, it seems, but not as wrong as Karen. And neither of them could have anticipated you. Dane Mercer, the choices you've made, the person you are. She moved toward him cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. I did not know about this plan. I did not use you as my father suggested. Everything that has happened between us has been real, unexpected, unplanned, and all the more valuable for it. Dane wanted to believe her. Part of him did believe her. But the revelation had opened a well of doubt that couldn't be easily closed. I need time, he said finally, to think, to decide what this means. Nairi nodded, though pain was evident in her eyes. Take whatever time you need, but know this. Regardless of what my father planned or what Karen did, my feelings for you are my own. Not calculated, not strategic, simply true. She left him then, alone in the core chamber, with a decision that suddenly seemed far more complicated than it had been just hours before. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Dane withdrew from court activities, spent hours in meditation trying to sort through his conflicting emotions. Nairi respected his need for space, though he occasionally caught glimpses of her watching him from a distance, her expression unguarded and sorrowful. It was during this period of reflection that Dane received an unexpected visitor, Hala, Nairi's oldest friend and advisor. "You're being an idiot," she announced without preamble, finding him in the palace gardens where he had taken to spending his mornings. "Good morning to you too," Dane replied dryly. Hala's skin shifted to an irritated orange as she sat beside him on the stone bench. "You've been avoiding her for 5 days. The coronation is in 9. A decision must be made." "I'm aware of the timeline. Are you aware of what you're doing to her? She barely eats, barely sleeps. She's throwing herself into state business to distract from the pain." Hala's color softened slightly. "She loves you. You fool. Actually loves you, which I never thought I'd see from her after everything she's been through." Dane sighed. "It's complicated, Hala." "It's really not. Yes, her father was a manipulative old tyrant who had contingency plans for every possible scenario. Yes, some of those plans involved using you, but Nairi is not her father. She never knew about those plans. And even if she had, do you really think the woman you've come to know would follow them?" "That's just it. How well do I really know her? Any of you? I've been here for 3 months, thrown into the middle of 1,000 years of history and politics. I barely understand." Hala's skin shifted to a contemplative blue. "When Nairi was captured, before she ended up at your station, do you know what happened to her? Karen's men tortured her for days. Not just physically. They used the resonance network against her, tried to break her mind, to make her believe she was the traitor they claimed she was." Dane stared at her, shocked. Nairi had never mentioned this. "She survived because she knows who she is." Hala continued. "At her core, unshakable. That's the woman who found you, who bonded with you, who fought beside you. Not some scheming princess following her father's playbook, but a woman strong enough to defy generations of prejudice and tradition because she believed it was right." Hala stood, her color returning to its normal amber. "The question isn't whether you know her. It's whether you trust what you do know of her." She left him then, her words echoing in his mind long after she had gone. Trust. It all came down to that, didn't it? Not certainty. There could never be complete certainty in matters of the heart. But trust. The choice to believe in someone despite doubts, despite fears. That evening, Dane sought out Nairi. He found her in her study, surrounded by preparations for the coronation, looking exhausted but determined. When she saw him, she dismissed her advisors with a gesture, giving them privacy. "I've made my decision," Dane said without preamble. Nairi straightened, her expression carefully controlled. "And?" I'm staying. If you'll still have me. The control slipped, relief and joy flooding her features, before she managed to compose herself again. What changed your mind? Nothing changed, Dane admitted. I'm still not sure who I am or where I belong. I still don't understand all the history and politics that brought us to this point. But I know who you are, Neri Ashal, and I choose to trust that person, whatever your father might have planned. Nairi moved toward him slowly, as if afraid he might change his mind if she moved too quickly. And the throne, the responsibilities that come with it? Terrifies me, Dane said honestly. I never wanted power or position, but if being at your side means accepting those things, then I'll do my best to be worthy of them. You already are, Neri said softly, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, the simple contact conveying more than words could express. There were still doubts, still uncertainties, still 1,000 questions to be answered. But in that moment, the decision felt right. There's something else you should know, Dane said after a moment. Something I discovered while reviewing the restored records. Nairi tilted her head questioningly. The threat that the original human diplomats came to warn about. It's still out there. Your father knew it, which is why he supported Karen's military buildup, if not his methods. According to the latest long-range scans, it's approaching the outer boundaries of known space. What kind of threat? The records are unclear. Some kind of non-organic intelligence, highly advanced, apparently hostile to all biological life. The Human-Ashalian Alliance was formed specifically to prepare for its arrival. Nairi absorbed this information with the steadiness he had come to admire in her. Then we have work to do, she said simply. Alliances to rebuild, defenses to prepare. Not exactly the peaceful reign you were hoping for, Dane observed. Perhaps not, but a necessary one. She squeezed his hand. And one we'll face together. The coronation ceremony was a spectacle unlike anything in recent Ashalian history. Held in the Great Plaza before the Imperial Palace, it was broadcast throughout the Empire and to neighboring systems as a declaration of a new era. Neri stood resplendent in traditional royal regalia, the crown of the Ashalian Empire held ready to be placed upon her head. Beside her, equally formally attired, though noticeably less comfortable, stood Dane. The official who conducted the ceremony was ancient, his skin a pale, papery white that spoke of great age, even among the long-lived Ashalians. He recited the traditional words, speaking of duty and honor, of the sacred trust between ruler and ruled. And then came the moment of truth. Do you, Neri Ashal, accept the crown and throne of the Ashalian Empire, with all its burdens and privileges? I do, Neri replied, her voice clear and strong. The official turned to Dane. And do you, Dane Mercer, accept the position of king consort, bound to the throne and the queen by the ancient debt of life? Dane looked out at the assembled crowd, Ashalians mostly, but with representatives from other species, including a small human delegation hastily assembled when news of the restored alliance had reached Earth. He saw uncertainty in many faces, open hostility in some, cautious hope in others. I do, he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. Not because of ancient law or royal blood, but by choice, my choice, and Queen Neri's. A murmur ran through the crowd at this unorthodox addition to the traditional response. The official looked briefly scandalized, then resigned, continuing with the ceremony. The crown was placed upon Neri's head, a circlet of intricate metalwork that seemed to catch the light in impossible ways. A smaller, but equally ornate crown was placed upon Dane's. The official proclaimed them queen and king consort of the Ashalian Empire, and the crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and murmurs. As they turned to face their subjects for the first time as crowned rulers, Dane leaned slightly toward Neri. Did I mess up the ceremony? He whispered. Spectacularly, she whispered back, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And exactly as you should have. This reign begins with choice, not obligation, with truth, not tradition for tradition's sake. They proceeded through the remaining rituals of the coronation, the formal presentation to the imperial council, the procession through the capital, the royal feast that would last well into the night. Throughout it all, Dane observed the reactions of those around them, noting who seemed genuinely supportive, who merely political, who potentially problematic. It was during the feast, as various dignitaries came forward to offer congratulations and pledge allegiance, that Dane noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere. A hush fell over one section of the Great Hall, conversations dying as attention focused on a late arrival. Karen Ashel, still technically under house arrest but permitted to attend the coronation under guard, made his way slowly toward the royal dais. He looked diminished somehow, his once proud bearing now hesitant, his violet eyes shadowed with what might have been grief or simply exhaustion. The guards tensed as he approached, but Neri gestured for them to stand down. The hall fell completely silent as Karen stopped before his sister and her consort. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking at them. Then, to the astonishment of all present, he sank to one knee in the formal gesture of fealty. "My queen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My king consort, I offer my loyalty and service, if you would have them." Nairi's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts, but Dane could feel her tension through their linked hands. "You have committed crimes against the Empire, brother. Against me personally." "I have," Karen acknowledged, "and I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. But first, I beg the opportunity to make amends, to serve the Empire as it truly should be, not as I tried to force it to be." Nairi glanced at Dane, a silent question in her eyes. Through their connection, strengthened by both the royal bond and genuine feeling, he sensed her conflict, the desire for reconciliation warring with the memory of betrayal. Dane studied Karen carefully. Through the signet, which he now wore permanently as a ring on his right hand, he extended his awareness toward the kneeling prince. What he sensed was not deception, but genuine remorse. A mind that had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths and had emerged changed by the experience. "Rise, Prince Karen," Dane said, making the decision that Nairi seemed unable to. "Your crimes will not be forgotten, but redemption remains possible, through service and loyalty proven over time." Karen stood slowly, surprise evident in his face at hearing judgment from the human rather than his sister. "You will remain under supervision," Nairi added, finding her voice. "But I appoint you royal envoy to the outer territories. There, you will help spread the truth of our restored history and prepare our people for the challenges that lie ahead." It was both mercy and clever politics, removing Karen from the capital while giving him a purpose that would test his newfound loyalty. The former regent bowed deeply, acceptance, and perhaps a flicker of gratitude in the gesture. As he withdrew, conversation gradually resumed throughout the hall, the incident becoming instant court gossip. Neri turned to Dane, a question in her eyes. "You sensed something in him," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Change," Dane confirmed. "Genuine, if still fragile. Your father's revelations hit him as hard as they hit us. Maybe harder. He's questioning everything he thought he knew." "And you trust this change?" "Trust but verify," Dane said with a small smile. "Hence the assignment that keeps him busy but monitored." Nairi's answering smile was warm with approval. "You're taking to royal politics more naturally than you admit." "Don't remind me," Dane groaned. "I still can't believe I'm wearing a crown." "It suits you," she said, reaching to adjust it slightly where it had tilted. "As does the title. King Dane of the Ashalian Empire," he mused. "Former vending machine repair technician. I don't think that's in the standard career progression." Nairi laughed, the sound bright and genuine amid the formality of the occasion. Several nearby courtiers looked startled to hear such unguarded emotion from their new queen. "Get used to startling them," Dane advised in a whisper. "This reign is going to be different in a lot of ways." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually, the new monarchs were able to withdraw to their private quarters. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the noise and pageantry, both seemed to exhale simultaneously, tension draining from their postures. Dane removed his crown with relief, placing it carefully on its stand. "I don't think I'll ever get used to the weight of that thing." "The symbolic weight is far heavier than the physical," Neri observed, removing her own crown with practiced ease. "And that never becomes lighter." They moved to the balcony that overlooked the capital city, now lit with celebratory lights and fireworks that burst periodically across the night sky. Standing side by side, they watched their subjects celebrate a new beginning, one that many didn't fully understand yet, but that offered hope after years of increasingly oppressive rule. "Are you ready for this?" Neri asked quietly. "For all of it. The politics, the responsibility, the coming threat." Dane considered the question seriously. "Ready? No, but willing? Yes." He turned to face her. "When I helped you on that station, I never imagined where it would lead. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing." "Nor would I," Neri said, moving closer. "Though I'm sorry for not being entirely truthful at the beginning." "You did what you had to do," Dane acknowledged. "And I did what I chose to do. That's the difference between us, I think. You were bound by duty, by birthright. I had the freedom to choose." "And now?" Neri asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Now I choose you," Dane said simply. "Every day, I choose you, not because of royal bonds or ancient laws or political advantage, but because of who you are and who I am when I'm with you." Neri reached for him then, their embrace silhouetted against the backdrop of celebration lights. Two figures from different worlds brought together by chance, choice, and perhaps something like destiny. Far beyond the borders of the Ashalian Empire, beyond even the reach of the most advanced monitoring systems, something ancient and patient continued its inexorable approach. A threat that would test their new alliance, their restored history, their very existence as biological beings. But that was a challenge for tomorrow. Tonight, a queen and her unlikely king consort stood together at the beginning of a new chapter. For themselves, for their empire, and for the galaxy that would soon depend on the strength of their union. In the darkness between stars, a single moment of compassion, a hand extended to help a stranger in need, had set in motion events that would reshape the course of history. Not through conquest or manipulation, but through the simple, powerful choice to do what was right. And in that choice lay the true strength of humanity, and the hope for all species who would soon face the gathering darkness together.